Whereas the classical era of music was characterized by elegance, discipline, and structure, the Romantic era in music was a time of great diversity, innovation, and passion. Out of this era came some of the most accomplished and daring composers that ever lived. Chopin, Schubert, Wagner, and Brahms were just some in this enormous list of geniuses. But where did Franz Liszt fit into this picture? He was one of the greatest innovators since Beethoven, and if there were one composer that understood the sheer expansiveness of Romanticism, it was Liszt. He was a man of extreme contrasts, something that is well reflected in his music. We hear moments of the most violent, diabolical outbursts, and some of the most heartbreaking, vulnerable cries. But with that, we also hear the most grandiose, victorious, and heroic melodies. When listening to Liszt, we can hear echoes of the great composers of the past, but with that, we also hear expansive forms and harmonies that usher in the next century of composers. That is why you need to listen to Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was born on October the 22nd, 1811, in Riding, Hungary. His father, Adam Liszt, was an amateur musician and quickly realized Franz's talent. Inside their home, Adam would often show his son the structured music of Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn. When the young Liszt heard them, he would be ecstatic and try to improvise on their music. However, Franz also grew up with another type of music, this kind not introduced by his father. This was the free-flowing, sometimes vulgar, gypsy music that Franz could hear right outside his house. These contrasting styles, classical and gypsy, played a huge influence on Liszt. You often hear it in his compositions, complex, passionate passages interwoven with vulgar, rhapsodic tunes, like in his third funeral ode. At the age of 9, Franz gave his first concert as a pianist, and it was astounding. Hungarian magnates who attended the concert saw the talent in the young Liszt and made an investment in him by paying for the next 6 years of his education. But Adam, his father, would soon find out that Hungary could not give Liszt the knowledge and attention he needed, and so he made a bold decision: to move to Vienna in 1821. This move would prove to be a great success. Vienna was the home to one of the greatest music teachers of the time, Carl Czerny. Czerny saw Liszt on the one hand as a careless, sickly child, but he also saw great potential in Liszt and decided to dedicate almost every night to teaching him. Czerny meticulously fixed Liszt's technical problems and created a firm foundation of technique, but perhaps most importantly, Czerny also established a huge respect in Liszt for the music of Beethoven. Czerny was himself a student of Beethoven, and Beethoven would become one of Liszt's greatest inspirations for the rest of his life. While people recognized that Liszt was a superb pianist, it was around this time that Adam noticed a talent in Liszt's ability to compose music. And so he found one of the greatest composition teachers in Vienna. This was the 71-year-old Antonio Salieri, who was made famous by common folklore as the rival of Mozart. Adam Liszt saw his son's success in Vienna, but he wanted even more, and so he took a leap of faith in moving to Paris. Paris did bring them greater success, but after 3 years of continuous touring, both father and son were exhausted. And that's when tragedy hit. Adam became suddenly ill and passed away. Franz lost his mentor and his father, and this event would plunge him into a period of deep sorrow. Franz Liszt, shocked by the death of his father, composed a funeral march, a piece that laments over his father, but also over his career as a prodigy, which he felt had been brutally crushed by fate. With no income, Franz reluctantly became a piano teacher. His love for music started to fade soon after, and it was only because of his mother that he would give music another chance. These were some of the darkest moments in Liszt's life, and we can hear this dark energy in many of his compositions, like this passage from his piano concerto. However, Liszt's life would soon take a great turn due to three colossal events. The first event exploded in July of 1830, when the French July Revolution sprang into full force. Surprisingly, this brought Liszt out of his depression and inspired him to sketch a revolutionary symphony, which wouldn't be finished until almost 2 decades later. The second big event in his life would come some months later in the form of a fantastical symphony. Liszt heard Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique in concert, and this climactic, diabolical, and passionate symphony would forge an indissoluble bond with Liszt. The third big event came soon after, when Liszt attended a charity concert by Niccolò Paganini. Paganini's virtuosic style of playing would resonate with Liszt so deeply that Liszt made a decision to become the Paganini on the piano, a virtuoso the likes of which the world had never seen. In the past decade, Liszt had also picked up another interest: literature. He was fascinated by writers like Byron and Goethe, and there was another writer who was just as fascinated with Liszt as he was with literature: Marie d'Agoult. From 1835 to 1838, they travelled to Switzerland and Italy, and they fell in love and had 3 children: Daniel, Blondine, and Cosima. But this wasn't just a love for travelling. These were, as Liszt called them, the years of pilgrimage. It's here where Liszt's passion for composing blew up. With the combination of his accumulated literary knowledge, the beautiful scenery of Switzerland, and the legendary scenes of Italy, Liszt composed 2 suites of music that had a new level of innovation and complexity. The first suite was based on a year in Switzerland, and the second suite was based on a year in Italy. Each suite is filled with movements inspired by the buildings, places, works of art, and even moods that he encountered on his travels. What we can notice in this music is its sheer innovation and creativity. Liszt started to experiment with unusual dissonances and odd textures. Take this piece, his Après une lecture de Dante, Fantasia quasi sonata. That's movement 7 from Suite 2. A whole piece built off of tritones and a chromatic descent. From its stark, lamenting introduction to its tempestuous cascade of chords, taking us through scenes of the growling souls in hell, all the way to its earth-shattering climax, depicting victorious choruses represented with barrages of octaves. He brought the piano to its absolute limits. But the world was ever-changing, and Liszt wanted to create music more innovative than anything he had ever written before. It was Liszt himself who said, "New wine demands new bottles. Out with the old forms, in with the new." In a flurry of inspiration came the Faust Symphony. Decades ago, Berlioz had introduced Liszt to Goethe's famous play, Faust. This play greatly intrigued Liszt, and the Faust Symphony ditched the old 4-movement form of the classical symphony, and he instead captures the psychological and physical characteristics of each of the main characters in Goethe's story: Faust, Gretchen, and Mephistopheles. Each movement focuses on one of these characters. Liszt also extensively develops a technique that Beethoven started: thematic transformation. The technique of using a theme and transforming it in all kinds of different ways, showing off the sheer potential of a raw idea. The symphony starts with this upwards arpeggio theme, which is essentially a 12-tone row, well before 12-tone music was even conceived of. And it will return in all kinds of transformations and disguises, like here, or here, or here. Many of these transformations are subtle, sometimes almost unrecognizable from the original theme, but it shows just how far Liszt could develop and run with a single idea. But this symphony could not fulfill Liszt's desire for new forms. Liszt's composing output was about to enter an even higher level of innovation. This was the invention of the symphonic poem. Since the premiere of Symphonie Fantastique, Liszt had always tried to expand on what Berlioz created. A symphonic poem was an orchestral work that was used to capture or evoke the poetic feelings of different paintings, poems, and landscapes. With the symphonic poem, Liszt finally brought his old sketches of ideas to life. Take, for example, the Héroïde funèbre symphonic poem, which was inspired by the men that died fighting in the July Revolution 20 years ago. The piece balances symphonic elements of traditional musical development with programmatic elements or storytelling elements, which seem to describe the battle musically, along with a funeral march for its casualties. Perhaps today, Liszt's reputation lies in his virtuosic years, the years of 1838 to 1847. His first concerts were extremely controversial. The media made fun of him for his dramatic gestures and over-the-top improvisations. When Liszt performed his highly virtuosic transcriptions and compositions in Paris, it wasn't exactly well received. The critics were especially hard on the growing virtuoso, and they refused to publish any of his piano works. It would take several months for the audience to adapt to Liszt. In the modern day, solo recitals can fill concert halls regularly, and they can be an extremely enjoyable way of listening to music. But the factors that make a solo recital so enjoyable, the assortment of different pieces, the memorization of the music, and the solo pianist posing as superstar, all of these characteristics of a solo recital can be traced back to Liszt. It was Liszt, for example, who had the piano positioned side on to the audience with the lid open, so that they could see his hands, face, and instrument all in one. This positioning is now conventional worldwide thanks to Liszt. Without Liszt, who knows if the solo recital as we know it today would even exist? Anyway, Liszt's fame had exploded by 1842, and people were obsessed with his playing style, his looks, and even his dramatic gestures that the media made fun of all those years prior. He played with such passion and fury that the famous German writer Heinrich Heine came up with a term for all the madness that would occur when Liszt performed: Lisztomania. When Liszt played, some people would faint and others would trample each other just to get his handkerchiefs and dead cigars. You could almost argue that Liszt was a precursor for Elvis mania or Beatlemania. Liszt's composing style also developed. His piano music inherited a sort of symphonic tone. By the end of 1847, Liszt had performed over 1,000 concerts and toured most of Europe. But Liszt shocked the world by suddenly ending his career as a virtuoso. Liszt and his wife had separated. Afterwards, he started a relationship with Princess Caroline von Sayn-Wittgenstein. It was Caroline who convinced Liszt to stop his life as a virtuoso and to focus on composition. Liszt was no stranger to tragedy. Critics scorned him, some mocking him. Of course, the loss of many friends hurt Liszt, but even more than that would be the loss of his loved ones and his children. Liszt never got over the death of his father, and the loss of his children brought Liszt into another deep depression. Death, being such a prominent theme in Liszt's life, would creep on him in one final epilogue. Unable to handle the burdens of life, Liszt retreated to a monastery for a quieter, more religious ending. He took one last year of pilgrimage, this time alone and isolated. Liszt's compositional style changed dramatically with one final burst of creativity. The late Liszt works were largely religious, often containing elements of the prominence of death and the afterlife. These late works would also be his most innovative. His Legend No. 1, depicting St. Francis of Assisi preaching to the birds, formed the bedrock of Impressionist music, with its cascade of arpeggios representing birds happily chirping, while his macabre Bagatelle sans tonalité created a new path for expressionists of the 20th century. But his long-awaited death finally came on July 31st of 1886, and he was buried in Bayreuth in Germany. As one of the 20th century's most accomplished pianists, Claudio Arrau, later stated, Liszt's most important and enduring works are born of his riveting imagination, his complete technique, and foresight of the direction in which the language of music might evolve gradually. Do you struggle with the essential core skills of music? I'm talking about sight reading, writing, and ear training. Many people have strong musical ambitions, but have never had the opportunity to develop these skills. Without them, you are missing so much of what music has to offer, and you're holding yourself back from real development. I want to introduce you to the Musicality Training Program, a complete, holistic, step-by-step training program for your musicianship, from absolute beginnings to a university level of skill. This program will guide you every step of the way to develop the key skills needed to become a first-rate musician. It's designed to develop your musicianship from every angle, with bite-sized theory lessons followed immediately by a wide range of exercises to help that theory really sink in. This program has worked on hundreds of musicians, and getting started is super simple. First, head to the website, then simply sign up for the program. It takes 2 minutes. And finally, you follow through with each stage of the program step by step and watch as your musicianship develops significantly. Remember, if you want to become a confident musician, you need to take your training seriously. And if you want to transform your musicianship, develop great ears, sight reading, and writing skills, then your next step is to go ahead and get registered for this training program.